Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. I'm Jon Ferro, along with Lisa Abramowicz and Anne-Marie Hordern. Join us each day for insight from the best in markets, economics and geopolitics. From our global headquarters in New York City, we are live on Bloomberg Television weekday mornings from 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify or anywhere else you listen. And as always, on the Bloomberg Terminal and the Bloomberg Business app.
So here's the latest. ABC News confirming Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump have agreed to a presidential debate on September 10th. The two sides hitting the campaign trail in full force today. Harris holding a rally in Phoenix as Trump heads to Montana. Jeannette Lowe, Strategas, joins us now for more. Jeannette, this has been agreed. September 10th is the date on ABC. I just wonder from your perspective who is most at risk going into that?
I think that Trump is a little bit more worried about his positioning since Harris has gotten into the race and is now the Democratic nominee. So I think he is actually looking at this to try to have a similar debate as he had on June 27th against President Biden. So I think there's more risk there. What we're definitely seeing since Harris has gotten into the race is a lot more momentum on the Democratic side. You've seen the national polls, a 3.5 percentage point move from Trump, who had been up about 3 percentage points, to now Harris being up just as about a half a percentage point. In the swing states that matter for this election, you've seen a move of more than 2.5 points in Harris's direction. So now we really do have a 50-50 race where it could be very close come November. And I think he really wants to use the debate to try to re-highlight and be able to attack Harris on some of the key issues that he thinks are lacking now.
Jeannette, he also, yesterday in his press conference, Donald Trump floated two other debates. Who is more at risk of having more debate time when it comes to not just on this ABC News one, but Trump was floating an NBC News debate as well as a Fox News debate?
You know, it's interesting. So obviously, I think the June 27th debate was probably a bit of a surprise to many people. Usually the incumbent president does lose their presidential debate, but that was just quite a different debate than I think anyone was expecting. Trump could be more disciplined in the debates, as we saw in the June 27th debate. But at the same time, there could be, different reactions, kind of like what we had in his press conference yesterday, where that could actually hurt him. Now, if Harris is also on the defensive and he's actually able to get a lot of blows, that can hurt her. So debates can actually be quite up in the air. I think that's why we also kind of want to see what happens in this first debate and if that means we want more than one. Usually, obviously, we do have three, so I think Trump is now trying to go back to that traditional mode, but that's also a lot in a couple of weeks right before the election, so we'll see what happens.
We also heard from Kamala Harris yesterday, the vice president, talking about the fact that her team has scheduled, or she's asking her team to schedule a sit-down interview before the end of the month. Unclear if that means it's going to be scheduled for August or potentially September. But there was also reporting that they would maybe want to sit her down with her VP pick, Governor Walz. Do you get a sense that the campaign is trying to shield her from some of these more direct confrontations with journalists?
You know, I think it's unclear. I think one of the things that this has been a very fast campaign, so it's only been 3 weeks. I think to some extent she might be still trying to get her feet under her and make sure that she kind of knows what her policy positions are. So there could be some of that in part of the delay as to really be doing more of these interviews. But I think also she's kind of has the momentum at this point. Now, she is a better debater. She is better in front of the camera, I think, than she has been in the past. So I think that does have a benefit for her. But there could be other factors that I'm not quite sure exactly what they may be. But I think this is something that the Trump campaign is now trying to latch onto to try to make that saying that she won't show up in front of the press, she won't do interviews, and she won't take questions.
Jeannette, she's been vice president for about 4 years now. Is it a problem? She doesn't yet know her policies?
Well, I think it's also just, as a vice president, she's trying to toe the line of what the President Biden wanted. Right now, we've seen that she is not taking necessarily the same positions that she took as a candidate in the 2020 cycle. So things like fracking, she's trying to moderate her position on Israel a little bit. I think these are the things that she wants to really make sure she has really ironed out better, because obviously we know in this news cycle, people love to take anything that you say and then kind of spin it. So I think she also wants to make sure she does have her messaging down, but she does also have a risk there that if she's actually not showing up in front of the press and she's not able to answer questions and talk about her policies, that can also be a risk for her campaign as well.
Jeannette, just before you go, quite clearly the Vice President is driving enthusiasm at the top of the ticket. How are Senate and House races evolving since Biden dropped out and she stepped up?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that we've seen is that since Biden got off the ticket and Harris is now the new nominee, we've seen the odds of a Republican sweep drop quite a bit. They were at 55% on July 16th. They're now down to 32% this morning. And you also have 25% odds of a Democratic sweep and 25% odds of divided government in the scenario of a Democratic president, Democratic House, and a Republican Senate. I think what's interesting about this cycle is that you could have divided government under either scenario, whoever wins the presidency, just because the margins are so tight right now in the House and the Senate. So for instance, if Harris is getting a lot of momentum, the Democrats only need a net 4 seats to win the House. And those are seats that are also in states like Alabama, and there's 1 seat in Alabama. There's seats in California and New York and New Jersey. The Democrats do have an opportunity to flip this cycle. So if she has momentum, even if she doesn't win the presidency, there is still a possibility the Democrats could have control of the House. On the flip side, the Senate does look like it's going to move to the Republicans because you have Senator Manchin no longer running in West Virginia. I think that becomes a Republican pickup. And then also Jon Tester is currently down in the state of Montana. And so that could be another pickup. So there is this interesting dynamic where we could have divided government no matter what. So I think that that's something that we need to look forward to because it's obviously going to have big implications for what policies can be enacted next year, and particularly as we're talking about the debate, as about taxes and the debt ceiling debate.
Jeannette, got it. Just fantastic as always. Jeannette Lowe there at Strategas. The latest, Donald Trump using a Mar-a-Lago news conference to express frustration at the Federal Reserve. The comments echoing a Wall Street Journal report back in April, saying that Trump's allies are drawing up plans to blunt the Fed's independence should he win a second term. A report that Trump's team has since pushed back on repeatedly. Joining us now to discuss is Republican Congressman French Hill of Arkansas. Congressman, I'm going to start with a really dangerous question. What is the former president talking about?
Well, Jonathan, great to be with you. I think every president in the modern era has certainly criticized the Fed and lashed out at trying to have more control over the Fed. But since World War II, having Fed independence is important. We want to try to have price stability. That's their mission. I wish they focused only on price stability, but nonetheless, that's their mission. And over my time in public life, I've seen presidents tried to influence the Fed through moral suasion by calling them over to the Oval Office, like Jim Baker and Ronald Reagan with Alan Greenspan for the 1984 election year. But the bottom line is the Fed can have its chairman appointed by the president. So the Senate confirms that position. The House and Senate conduct major oversight over the operation. The Fed. So there is political tension there.
Congressman, we heard from Jared Bernstein, of course, from the White House, director of the chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. He tweeted this yesterday saying, history could not be clearer regarding the lasting and damaging inflationary consequences of ignoring this lesson of reversing the hard-earned progress of the past half-century. So you agree with the White House that the Fed should remain completely independent?
Well, I agree with the record of history that the Fed should be independent. That's a central bank tenet, that the Fed should generally, the central bank of a country should be independent of the fiscal authority or the legislative branch to protect price stability. And as I say, since World War II, when we had actually Treasury representation on the Fed board, that's been done informally through the appointment process to make sure the president's pleased with whoever the chair is, and the Senate confirmation process. And there have been times during tension where there's been White House meetings with Fed chairs or White House influence. Richard Nixon famously trying to influence Arthur Burns during the 1972 election cycle, the Jim Baker and Ronald Reagan anecdote that I just mentioned. But structurally, it's maintained its independence, and I think that's important.
So let's talk about some of the Fed policy. When the former president was talking about this yesterday, that he would potentially have a better gut feeling on what interest rates should be, he said that he, Chair Powell, tends to be a little bit late on things. He gets things a little bit too early and a little too late. And he says he would have this feeling that potentially he'd be a better Fed chair because of that. Do you agree with where the Fed is right now? Or do you think they should be cutting? And if so, do you think it'll be political for them to take this cut in September?
Well, Chairman Powell says they're data dependent. I think that's good. But I think the way to avoid these kinds of fights without much assurance of what direction or the other is to have a rules-based monetary policy. The so-called John Taylor rule from Stanford University. John and I worked together on the White House staff in the 90s. The so-called Taylor rule would make a range of mathematical recommendations on the targeting of short rates by the Fed, as opposed to it being just a group of individuals on the Board of Governors deciding that, or as Jim Grant refers to it, the PhD standard. We'd actually have a rules-based standard. Some others want to go back to a gold standard. But a rules-based standard would have a range of guidance to the Fed of when to cut and how much to cut. And that would take some of this instinct out of it.
So, Congressman, given that, and this is a criticism other people have said, that the Fed needs more of a framework. They don't have a reliable framework at this moment. Do you think that's something that should be mandated in for the Fed? Would you like to see something along those lines?
I would like to see a rules-based framework. And when Chairman Powell was before the committee a few weeks ago, I asked him the status of their reassessment of their very famous decision in August of 2020 in the middle of a pandemic to just let inflation run a little hotter than 2%, knowing that they could rein it in, which I think is a strong presumption that I don't know that's based in fact, as we've witnessed since 2021. So I think that is an opportunity for the Fed to reassess using a rules-based framework for their monetary policy.
Congressman, since we last spoke, this race has changed a lot, particularly in the last month. Can you talk to me about how you see things evolving right now? When it comes to the issues, I think the impression that a lot of people have that are coming on this program right now is that we're not really talking about those so much. It feels like we're talking about the enthusiasm, the vibes, and the improvement that we're seeing on the Democratic ticket since the sitting president dropped out of the race. When it comes to the issues, I know that you're very, very focused still, Congressman, on immigration. Can you walk us through the things that you're concerned about? And do you think the former president is doing a decent job of prosecuting the case?
Well, first, let's start there. I think to win this election, it's a great opportunity for President Trump to be reelected. I think his policies are much more in alignment of my views are on the economy and national security, and particularly border security. But we've got to stay focused on the issues and get off some of the personalities here. Let's focus on the issues, and I think if President Trump and his vice president nominee, J.D. Vance, focus on the issues of national security, the border, community policing, inflation, they win, and they win hands down. On the border, what I'm the most concerned about by the horrible Biden policy of an open border is not just the millions of people he's allowed in the country that we don't have a full instinct of what to do about or how to handle it, and swamping our border patrol system, but the number of terrorists, people on the terror watch lists that are in this country. And we've asked Chairman Turner of the Intelligence Committee, Chairman Green of the Homeland Security, and I have persistently for months asked for this administration and the FBI and Homeland Security to tell us where these people encountered on the terror watch list are in this country. What has happened to them? And when you think about millions of gotaways, how many more people are in the country that we don't know about, that we did not encounter? I find this very concerning in light of the Pakistani comments about the Trump assassination attempt, the continuing documented Iranian influence in the country on assassinations, and the recent Philadelphia discovery of a ISIS-K network that was operating in the country, having come across our open border.
Congressman, if you're so concerned about the border, why did the Republicans then ditch this idea of the legislation that was circulating, starting in the Senate with Lankford, when it came to border security?
Well, first, we passed H.R. 2, which is the preferred approach for House Republicans on both immigration reform and border security. We got it passed. We sent it to the Senate. There was no action on it. Senator Lankford did good work trying to find consensus in the Senate. But look, he was still facilitating thousands of people, undocumented people, coming in the border. He was not taking the concrete steps that we put in H.R. 2. So I think, Anne-Marie, that was the key difference for Speaker Johnson, for House Republicans. And that's why that bill did not proceed in the Senate.
Congressman, we have to do this more often, sir. It's good to catch up. And I promise,
with you.
I say this every single year. Razorbacks football, we're going to make it happen this winter, OK? Going to make it happen.
You got
all right?
some.
Thank you, sir. Congressman French Hill of Arkansas. Debra Netschert of Jennison expecting the growth to continue for Lilly, writing this: thanks to a significant ramp up in manufacturing capacity, uptake is going to increase dramatically in 2026 to 28. This will translate into significant sales and earnings acceleration. Debra's joining us now to walk us through all of this and expand and give us detail, Debra, in a way that I think we've been lacking over the last few weeks or so. Welcome to the program. I think for many people, and I'll speak for myself, when it comes to Novo versus Lilly, I don't know what the difference is, what the drugs are, and what the real distinction is between the two companies is, Debra. Can you help us with that? What is the distinction between those two firms and the treatments and the drugs that they're putting out to market?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me. It really does feel like they are part of the same conversation lately and thought about as one company, doesn't it? So Lilly is, we'll start with Lilly. Lilly is a little bit more of a diverse company than Novo. They have a huge business in diabetes and obesity, as we've talked about and as everyone knows, but they also have been incredibly successful in oncology and immunology, and are just launching a new drug for Alzheimer's. But because of the sheer size of the diabetes and obesity business, a lot of the rest of Lilly does not get talked about. The main drugs for Lilly are Zepbound and Mounjaro. Zepbound is marketed for obesity, whereas Mounjaro is marketed for diabetes. Novo is a little bit more of a diabetes pure play. They've had a very long, tenure in diabetes with a big insulin business turning to the GLPs. They have Ozempic for diabetes. They have Rybelsus, and then they also have Wegovy, which is their obesity drug.
Debra, I want to understand the difference between those obesity drugs themselves. For example, one of the big criticisms of Novo was you have this drug that comes out and it allows people to lose weight, but you have a problem where people are losing muscle mass, that in a way they're almost becoming less healthy because of that. Who is at the forefront of addressing that issue?
Well, I think the jury's out whether or not the muscle mass is really an issue right now. We need longer term data on obesity, which we don't yet have. I think the one thing that you should think about is we at Jennison really focus on the long term. And if you look at the long term data from diabetes, we're not seeing any adverse events related to this difference between muscle and fat loss. So I think we just need a little bit more time and a little bit more data to see whether or not this is a long-term issue with these drugs.
And in the meantime, I mean, the adoption and even just the addressable market for these drugs, Debra, is really big. Since the 1970s, the United States has had an uptrend in obesity rates. Are we about to witness a wholesale societal shift where for the first time really since the Great Depression that obesity rates are going to start to fall?
It would be really great if we could see that, because there is such a large downstream effect of obesity on other body systems. One of the most interesting things about the GLPs is just the number of different diseases that they are having an impact on. So we've seen a positive cardiovascular risk reduction in morbidity and mortality. We've seen an impact on liver disease called MASH. We've seen positive impacts on sleep apnea. We've seen positive impacts on kidney disease and other types of cardiovascular diseases. So hopefully as time goes on and these GLPs are adopted, we'll see this downstream effect take place. I think the thing to focus on is since the obesity meds have come out, we've really been supply constrained. And both Lilly and Novo have made really positive strides on supply and are going to be exiting 2024 with significantly more supply than they've ever had before.
There's been a ton of enthusiasm, but you say utilization isn't even close in terms of percentage of these drugs in the market. Where do you see this going in terms of percentage of, the next 5-10 years?
I mean, significantly higher than we are now. We're really still only in the single digits when you think about obesity. So we have a long way to go.
There's a lot of people, Debra, as you know, trying to develop second derivative trades around this story. And I just wonder, for you and the team, what the process is that you go through to develop those kind of trades. I can tell you from our perspective on this program, we've had everyone from talking about the snack business all the way through to the airline business and talking about the savings on fuel costs, of all things, Debra, if the average passenger loses some weight. How are you thinking about those second derivative trades?
Well, when we think about the second derivative trades, we're really focused on looking at drugs that can actually move the puck forward, not really be similar to where we are now. The obesity market, we believe, is going to be incredibly different and segregated in lots of different ways in 10 to 15 years from now. And by that I mean there's going to be different types of drugs and different types of administration profiles and duration and timelines in which you take the drug for people that need to lose different amounts of weight. So there will be a lot more options if you need to lose 25% of your body weight or 10% of your body weight, there's going to be a drug for you. There's also going to be a lot of combination drugs for patients who have comorbid conditions. So we're really paying attention to companies that are going to be able to move the puck forward and find a differentiation. The thing that's really interesting is even Lilly, when they were on their second quarter call yesterday, talking about the amount of R&D that they are doing, that Novo's doing, they haven't stopped with these. Neither of these companies have stopped with developing drugs and R&D. They are still pedal to the metal to try to develop the next best thing. If you look at what's happened with supply and just the sheer number of clinical trials, a newcomer coming into this market is going to need to spend a significant amount of money on both R&D and manufacturing to really play. So it's not only about, can you develop a drug that has weight loss that is better? It's what else does this drug do? How is it different than what we have? Is it more tolerable? Is the administration profile more favorable? And then also, can you develop a really broad phase 3 program and afford to develop a really broad phase 3 program to demonstrate efficacy across as many diseases as both Lilly and Novo have and are continuing to? And then can you build manufacturing and scale it up and build supply to really be able to be a meaningful entrant in this market?
Yeah, that's not easy at all. Debra, appreciate your time. I'm pleased we got to make this happen. I have no doubt we'll be talking again soon. Debra Netschert there of Jennison Associates.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, bringing you the best in markets, economics and geopolitics. You can watch the show live on Bloomberg TV weekday mornings from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify or anywhere else you listen. And as always, on the Bloomberg Terminal and the Bloomberg Business app.